Welcome to the Own It Powercast, the place to be when you get serious about making big changes and accelerating growth in your life and in your relationships. Finally create the life you've always wanted, living life on your own terms. Learn how to take your fear and turn it into powerful choices that will create sustained change. Now your host, Mary Baker.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Own It Powercast, a place where you can come to get what you need to move yourself forward. Hey, it's Mary Baker, and welcome to episode 162, How to Become Free from What Has a Hold on You. Well, welcome back as we finish out this month, which has been all about attachments. Attachments we have to people, places, and things. And how the deeper we connect ourselves to them and allow that person, thing, or situation we're attached to influence our daily life, I think the unhealthier our relationships with them and with ourselves become. So, last week, remember, we defined attachment as a focus on desired outcomes. If it's a person, what you want for them, what you want them to think, believe, feel, do, and choose, how you want them to behave, what you don't want them to do. The thing could be the money, the weight, the food, someone else's behavior, the achievement, the asset. And the situation could be anything. Could be an upcoming event. Could be a conflict you're trying to avoid. Could be what's going on for the other person. Something that you need or you think you need to work out in a certain way. And like we talked about last week, in order to work on becoming less glommed onto something, there are things that we have to work on. It's a process. It won't change overnight. And it's a process I think we ironically have to grieve even thinking about having to do. But over time, we get better and better at releasing our attachment, releasing control. It's very normal at first to have anxiety, sometimes lots of it, as you're being asked to let go of the edge of a small cliff that you're grabbing onto and to trust that there's a soft landing below. Holding on to control is a hard habit to break, since your brain is rather convinced it's the safer thing to do. Especially for those of you who have past trauma, where bad things actually did happen. You had people in your life who betrayed you and let you down and you couldn't trust. It's hard for your brain to think that it's okay for you not to be in charge. Because it's all about being safe, feeling like things can be okay. So what do we do when we don't feel safe and we try to control and we find ourselves on the continuum of attachment that we've been talking about this month? If you recall, the more of your identity that you have tied up in what you're attached to, the deeper in you are, and the more problems you'll have. So these are some ways that we attach without sometimes even realizing it, because we can rationalize and say that these are other things. The biggest one is rescuing. When we rescue, we're trying to keep another person from feeling pain, from feeling the consequences of their behavior, of not owning their choices, of bad things happening to them. So it's trying to rescue them from having bad things happen, of not being where we want them to be and what we want for them, which is often really good things. You want your kids to be happy, let's say. You want your partner to be responsible so that you can count on them and trust them. You're trying to rescue yourself, though, in the end. You're trying to rescue yourself from having to deal with the tantrum that you know is going to come when you detach and say no, when you just leave them to figure it out, to choose, to own their choices, and hopefully to hit bottom, to feel pain, and to grow and to become better people. Think of the moments in your life where you've hit a sort of bottom, where you couldn't manipulate your way out of it anymore. No one was coming to bail you out. You had to decide to change, to be different, to do differently, to take responsibility. To own your choices is the only way to have great self-esteem. So when we rescue, it's because we don't trust. And maybe for good reason, we don't trust them to do the right thing. Again, if you had people growing up who didn't do the right thing, whether in general or do the right thing by you, you don't have that trust. And you don't have that innate ability to just realize that you have no control and you have to detach and let go. And for people who had caregivers they could basically trust, they are less likely to rescue. The questioning is another way that we stay attached. When you focus on them with lots of questions all the time. When are you taking care of that, you ask them? Are you going to get a different job soon? Are you going to take the trash out? Etc., etc., etc. It puts your fear on them as opposed to detaching and saying, well, you know, they really do know that trash goes out tonight. So they're either going to do it or they're not. And then I got to figure out what I'm going to do, which is what we fear the most. Because what if you have a partner who not only doesn't care when the trash goes out, but doesn't really do anything else around the house? Then you have a bigger problem to face. And it's not about the trash. But as long as you could question and make sure, quote unquote, that they're reminded so that maybe they won't forget, so maybe they'll want to do it. You see where I'm going. Then you could avoid perhaps making very difficult decisions. Avoiding the reality of the situation as is. Now, I'm not talking about asking people to be perfect. Every once in a while we forget stuff. And it's nice when your partner or your friend reminds you, hey, don't forget about that. But it's not their place, and that should not be done early and often. It should not be a pattern. It should not be the default. The final way is we control and persuade. We make sure they see, quote unquote, get them to understand, quote unquote. We try to convince, we try to persuade, we try to argue. We'll say the same thing 15 times during an argument to make sure they hear, as opposed to, wait a minute, you said it clearly twice. They either want to hear you or they don't. We beg and we plead. The focus is to control their thinking, beliefs, and their next moves. And that sounds really awful. But we do it so insidiously that it doesn't look like aggressive, jackass controlling. It's not as overt. It's, don't you think it would be a great idea for you to get a better job? I mean, you would get better pay. You'd have a shorter commute. So here with that, I'm trying to get you to see, quote unquote, and get you to think that that is a better idea. Healthier would have been, I personally would love to see you not have to drive so much and to, make what you're worth. But see, the healthier statement shows that I own my stuff, my feelings for you, my fears about you being unhappy and stressed out. When this gets nastier, as in the moves are for the controller to gain power, like they want you to ignore the money they owe you, or that they're just being irresponsible, or they're still drinking, or they're still acting out, that's when it can get manipulative and malicious, because there's a lack of empathy for other. That's a whole different situation and a whole different episode. Here we're talking more about what is your part? What are your fears? And they're coming from a good place, and they're probably coming from a big heart. It's because you love these people. It's because you care. It's because you care about your community and your country per se, too. Maybe that's why you go online and you debate and you argue. And sometimes argument's great. We learn from other people. They learn from us. But when we have to have a certain outcome and we have rigidity attached to that, that's when it's a problem. So how do we become less attached, aka let go of control? Well, first, detachment, which you hear me talk about all the time here, guys, because it is such magic and it's necessary. You can't do anything else until you detach first. You have to define what is theirs versus what is yours before you even know what to work on. You can't do it with enmeshment. When I work with relationships, one of the first things we have to do is to determine boundaries between where one person ends and the other begins. And that takes a minute. One person's thoughts and feelings and choices, separate from what the other person's thoughts and feelings and choices are. You can't work on someone else's stuff, and you can't work on something until it's defined as yours. So first, detachment. It doesn't mean that we don't care, and it doesn't mean emotional detachment. When you look that up, it looks like someone has gone almost catatonic where they don't feel anything. No, it just means that I don't have power over that. I have no control over what you think, feel, do, or choose. What you like, who you want to be, what you want to do with your life, I have no control over that. That's yours. Just because I doesn't mean you. Like, for example, just because I would love for you to get this message today, if this is something that you struggle with or someone that you love struggles with, because I'd love to see you heal from it, but you may not want to. You may not even identify yourself in this episode, even if you struggle with this stuff. And I have to let go of that. Just because they doesn't mean I. Just because I doesn't mean they. And I want to stop here for a moment, and I've described this before on the episodes, but both realities are valid. Just because I might want you to get the message today doesn't mean it's a bad thing that you don't. So I release judgment. And that's really important for detachment. And if you find yourself still upset, you're like, well, okay, just because I think she was being hurtful by what she did doesn't mean she thinks so. And what if she did something really awful? Of course, you want her to see that. You want the world to see that, and you want it fixed, and you want justice. I get it. So we have to grieve that too, which we'll get into in a moment. But first, we have to detach what you have zero control over. And guys, anything that belongs to them or out there ain't yours. For example, just because I want my daughter to go to college doesn't mean that she wants that for herself. Or even if she does want it, that she'll be successful at it. In other words, anything could happen. Just because I want my spouse to do more chores doesn't mean that's going to happen. So pulling apart, just because you want something doesn't mean they. And we can use this for a lot of things too. Like if you struggle with people pleasing, this is a wonderful mantra to get down. Just because they want me to help them this weekend doesn't mean I have time, and it doesn't mean that I'm a jerk. It doesn't mean I don't care about them. It just means, and then you fill in the blank from there. It just means that I had stuff already planned. And why is it healthier for me to keep that boundary? Walk it through. Well, they waited till Friday night to ask me. They didn't give me any heads up, and I already made plans. I made plans that are important, that matter to me, and I'll let others down if I don't, and I'll let myself down too. So you walk it through all the way through. Every situation's different. But if you struggle with people pleasing and you struggle with detachment, that is magic mantra right there. Just because I doesn't mean they. I think it also helps us to have more empathy, force ourselves at first, right? To have more empathy and understanding and compassion for where another person might be. I don't think you can really do that too easily if you're still caught up in it, because you still have your agenda, remember? You want what you want for them and or the situation. So healthy separateness and detachment is key first. That is a tough concept. And it doesn't mean you don't care. It just means you let go of control over what's not yours. Of course you care, and that's where the grief work comes, which again, we're going to get into in a minute. But first we have to detach. How are you going to know what to grieve if you don't know what you have to accept? For example, well, if he continues to screw up at work, he may be out of a job, and then you're going to have to accept that you guys might have to sell that house, and that's going to suck. And you work on coming to acceptance around your reality, because maybe you've talked to him about this like 3 or 4 times, and nothing's changed. Another example is your sister will either decide to go to therapy for her depression or not. It's not yours to fix. You can tell her your concerns, how you feel, how you're willing to support her, but then you have to let go. So detaching, letting go of what belongs to another person, is going to leave you with a lot of feelings. And if you haven't done this before, just be prepared and normalize it, and you're going to be okay. Nothing's going to come at you that you can't handle, but it is going to feel overwhelming. It's your perception. It's your perception you can't handle these feelings. It's not truth. Now, caveat, if this is a big traumatic situation, don't go in alone. Get some counseling, get a support group, get some people around you to hold you up while you walk through it. Don't be a hero. That's not bravery, that's cowardice in terms of not being willing to admit that you need help. So here come the feelings, and here we have to grieve. We want to familiarize ourselves even more with the grief process. First, obviously, is the denial, where you don't even realize you're caught up and attached. You argue your position. You say things like, bad things are going to happen if I take my hands off this, Mary. I have to, right? I have to because I'm a caring spouse. I'm a loving mom. I'm a good employer. Here's where it's so necessary to do some great boundary work. Talk with other people who have good boundaries, because they're going to help you sort out what is your responsibility to your spouse and your employees and your kids, and what is responsibility for, which is rescuing and enabling and controlling. Unless your kids are really little. So the denial, ignorance was bliss, is what I joke with clients about all the time. Because it was almost easy not knowing. We joke about that. It wasn't easy. It was awful. It was stressful, but you didn't understand why you were so stressed. Or you thought it was because they weren't doing what they should be doing, as opposed to you're trying to control stuff you can't control. After we come out of denial and we've done this detachment work, here comes the anger, where you hit the wall of reality. And you're like, oh no, but what about that? I can't live like that. This is going to be awful. It'll be terrible. I don't know if I can handle that. Why can't these other people just get their shit together so I don't have to sit in this pain? All kinds of fear and all kinds of frustration. And guys, some of that's valid. You're right. You should not have to live with an irresponsible spouse, or a kid who is awful to you, or a toxic boss, or awful neighbors. But the reality is maybe you do, for a lot of great contextual reasons, like we talk about all the time on the show, aka maybe we had a part in creating that, or at least being drawn to that toxicity. So the anger, not liking it, not liking it, not liking it, having your own set of tantrums, and that's okay. As long as you have them privately and don't leak them out on other people, they're healthy. Hit the pillow, hit the punching bag, go for a run, do whatever you need to do. Vent, journal. Then comes the bargaining, which I think can go hand in hand with anger, the what ifs and the if onlys, and the maybes. So here's where we pretend we're doing the grief work, but we're really not, because guess what we're going to do? We're going to say, well, maybe if I make it easier for them, maybe if I loan them the money, Mary, maybe help them get started. Oh boy, here we go again, trying to ensure the outcome. So be aware of that. Like, it's different bargaining if you're looking in the past and saying, oh gosh, what if I had only done this and just done that? We have to do that. We've got to sort through that. We think we can make it unhappen. Everyone's got to do it. But I'm talking about, don't do pretend bargaining where you're trying to change stuff in the present to detach a little bit, quote unquote. Nope. You're still in there. You're still trying to control stuff. So very common. Don't be hard on yourself if you're doing that. Just chuckle and say, okay, here I go. I'm still trying to let go. So after we're done fighting, right? then some sadness and some resignation and some depression sets in, and that's okay. You can feel a little empty. Because think about it. Here's been your hyper focus, right? Your drug du jour for months, let's say, or for years. Now what? So you can feel kind of empty and kind of sad. Also sad that you have resigned yourself that this could go 6 ways to Sunday. Maybe your kid doesn't make good choices. Maybe your spouse doesn't want to look in the mirror. Maybe you do have to find a different job. Maybe you do have to detach a little bit from your family of origin because they're abusive. So we're just sitting with it. We're not fighting anymore. We're just sad. And then finally comes acceptance on its own accord. I don't think we have control over that. I think one day you realize you're just not entrenched anymore and you have some peace and you've moved on. You have other things you're focusing on and hopefully within yourself. So hopefully all that makes sense in terms of detach, feel, and grieve. So here's a case study, which is kind of an amalgam of a lot of people that I've worked with over the years. And for all you parents out there, you might be able to relate to this next story. So there's a single mom who I will call Sherry, and she devotes her life to taking care of her kids. She works really hard to anticipate their every need because she doesn't want them to feel unloved or emotionally neglected like she did as a kid. She also bears a lot of guilt that their father is not involved in healthy ways in their life and is very selfish. At ages 7 and 10, they've been well nurtured and cared for by her, since she has them most of the time. For example, she makes their beds for them every morning and cleans up and helps them with their homework to the point of almost doing it because she doesn't want them to feel bad about themselves if they don't do well. There are a few chores for them to do since she feels like they're so busy with school and sports and friends and stuff. And besides, she hated how she felt like Cinderella growing up, how she wasn't allowed to play much as a child. There wasn't time because she had to take care of her 2 younger siblings. She really wants her kids instead to feel like they can relax and be happy. However, lately, as they're getting older, she's having a hard time getting them to do anything like clean up their toys, brush their teeth, finish their dinner, go to bed on time, and worse, to listen to and respect her. In fact, they're whining a lot at the store when they don't get what they want, and they're often fighting over things. Sherry's realizing that she's been losing her temper a lot lately with them, reacting to their behavior and angry that they don't respect her after all, quote unquote, she does for them. Sherry also finds herself questioning them more and more, like, how are they doing in school? Are they behaving? Are they listening to their teachers? Have they been nice to their friends? Because she's so worried about how they're acting out there. She's also noticing that the opposite seems to be true for them in terms of what she wanted. They don't seem happy anymore, and they certainly don't seem to be relaxed, especially when she gets mad at them. So what do you think Sherry's attached to here? Well, you guessed it. Her kids not being parentified, her kids being happy, her kids feeling loved and nurtured. However, like many parents before her, she has swung the pendulum way too far in the other direction. And now she's created a different problem, little monsters that run around her house who don't take responsibility and therefore have no boundaries. I think these kids have more anxiety because they don't know what to expect from her or from the home, and they're not feeling good about themselves because they become pretty darn entitled. They can control her, ironically. Sherry rescues them from having any consequences via owning their choices, which also hurts their self-esteem. And it makes Sherry feel disrespected in the meantime because she is being disrespected. Because she's owned all the problem and all the consequences all along. What does Sherry need to do? First, she needs to look at her behavior, what she's been trying to control, what her big fears are, what she's been avoiding, and she needs to grieve. To let herself admit that she is a loving, wonderful mom, and let herself admit what she's created. That even though she's a great loving mom, she can't make them happy. She can't make them responsible. She can't make them to want to do things her way. She must then work on healthy detachment and begin to set loving boundaries she is able to maintain so they can trust her and they can choose accordingly. Sherry needs to work with a coach or somebody to have support and accountability too, because it's way too hard not to cave when it gets stressful. At the end of the day, and you're tired and your kids are wearing you down, it's so much easier to give in just for now. You can take the template of Sherry and apply it to any relationship. You can apply it to a partnership where maybe she lets her partner get away with not being responsible, but then she becomes the parent in the relationship. She's a nag and she's a bitch and she questions and she controls and she guards her heart. And it's awful. Control is fear. Attachment is fear. The fear that we won't be okay if we let go. So today we looked at what really needs to happen if we want to begin letting go of what has actually been controlling us and making us so anxious and crazy on the inside, if we got honest. We talked about how the components of detachment and grief work are key to letting go of control and refocusing on ourselves so that we can have healthier relationships, not only with us, but with others. We're more peaceful to be around. There's so much less fear and anxiety. There are healthier boundaries. There can be vulnerability and then therefore better connection. All right. Thank you for joining me all month and thanks for being here today. Hopefully you got some good stuff that you can start working on. May you stay healthy and grounded. Work on detachment. Find some time to take care of you this week. If you don't get the newsletter, sign up for it at ownitpowercast.com. It comes out every Tuesday and has any bonus downloads of the episode. You can listen to the podcast right there as well. All right. So, pay it forward, keep focusing on you, and I'll see you next time.
We hope you took away some useful insights and tools you can begin using right away. If you did, please leave a positive review and share on your social media. Because could you imagine if everyone in your life really got it together? Remember, own it now, so you can really own it later.